So hi, my name is Sebastian, and we will talk about backup for the next 45 minutes. Yeah, backups are painful, I would say, but why is that? So most of the time it's more complicated backupping the data than even collecting them. So if you collecting massive amounts of data or stuff like that, it's sometimes a real hassle to execute the backups. And maybe we can do something about it. And so that's why I prepared this talk. And I think we can all agree having no backups would be a total disaster. Because, and disaster, most of the time when I talk to people and I ask them, do you have backups? And they say, no, everything's fine and it's good. They don't realize what disaster means. So just imagine if you lose all your customer data or the addresses of your customer or the payment data and everything's gone and you can't restore it. So that would really impact your business. And so I think having no backup is out of the option. So when we talk about backup, so we actually don't talk about just copying data from one place to another. We talk about a process, right? And the process is more than that. So if you've copied your data, maybe you want to make sure that you really copied the right thing, so that your backup is really containing the data you were hoping for. So the next step after copying your data would be to check your data. Just in the picture here, like have a deep dive in your backup and make sure everything's fine. The next step would be encrypting your data. So if you have personal data from your customers or users and you want to back it up, it's not a bad idea to encrypt the backup. So even if the backups get into the wrong hands, it's not so easy to get all the data you've stored there. And next step would be move the backup somewhere safe, right? So if you store the backup on the same server, you're collecting the data, and the server dies, your backup is gone as well. So you maybe want to move it somewhere safe. And this could be another hard drive. That would be at least the least what I would recommend, but this could be the cloud, some other server, some network storage device, whatever. And after putting it away, or if you collect backups and create backups regular, maybe it looks something like this. So maybe you should clean up the local created backups. So if you create backups daily, or even more than daily, stuff gets piled up on your local hard drive, and that's not a nice thing to happen, because a full disk normally means that the server doesn't work anymore. So you should clean up the backups. And last but not least, it would be really nice if we would get some feedback and alert if something bad happens. So all these kind of tasks belong to our backups. So normally for this talk, I have some funny quotes about backups, but I changed it earlier this year. Anybody could think about why I changed it? GitLab were a perfect example. So I don't want to pick on GitLab. So they're a great company and they're doing great stuff, and they handled the incident really awesome. But still, there was an incident. And what happened? Somebody deleted their production database, and they thought they had a backup, but they didn't. So it was quite painful for them to restore everything. yeah, like I said, they did an amazing job. They were really transparent, and yeah, the customers applauded them for them, but maybe not the best way to get applause from your customers. So yeah, keep it in mind and check your backups. So when the GitLab incident happened, the next day, the first mail I got from my CTO, I want reports on all of your backups. Mailed it to the entire IT departments of the whole company, and I want to see processes, I want to see blah, 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 blah. So yeah, he got a little wake-up call. Luckily for us, we already had backups in place. Of course we had. So what are we talking about? So what do we really want to back up? So once upon a time, it was really easy, right? So we had this tiny little web server and a MySQL database on it, and that's it, right? So nothing. That's really easy to back up. But over time, our applications evolve, and they get bigger and more complicated. And I couldn't find a picture of a Lego building I was looking for. I was more looking like for like a shop, and on top a gas station, and on the side a kiosk, and on top maybe another stuff, like, so totally crazy building I was looking for, and yeah, I couldn't find it. But maybe our shops look on the outside like this. On the inside, they maybe more look like this. And so they get really complicated, and that's what we most of the time call legacy application. And so we put all the stuff in there, and they get really complicated to back up. And meanwhile, in the internet happened this thing we call microservices, right? And we split everything up into smaller parts, so it keeps easy to handle those smaller parts. So maybe we have something here like a PHP web server, we have a MySQL database, Elasticsearch service, some Redis, and a file server, whatever. Yeah, you can go crazy with microservices. So everybody knows microservices and loves or hates them. I don't know. But microservices are always seen as the thing to go to, because it's the promised land. Microservices are the promised land. And no, they aren't, because they come with some limitations and some downsides as well. So one of them is the data fragmentation. So you don't have your data in one place anymore. So if you really follow the microservice principle, you don't have shared data over microservices. Each microservices has its own data. So your data is shredded all over the place. Yeah. And the other thing is you're using heterogeneous technologies. So somebody would say, oh, that's nice. We can use whatever we want. But yeah, you had to make sure you know how to back up the technology, right? So everybody knows MySQL and know MySQL dump, but how do we back up Elasticsearch? So maybe I don't know, or I have to read about it. And the last thing is responsibilities. Who's responsible for this microservices? In our company, it's got like crazy. So everybody spins up microservices, and if something went down or something crashes, okay, who's responsible for this microservice? And then everybody look like this. I don't know. Who? Maybe we'll find out. And then you dig deep into the stuff, and maybe you'll find out. So who of you needs to call a DevOps or a server administrator if you want to have a backup and can do it? No, if you want to create one. So I need a backup from right now. So, or I need the backup from yesterday to investigate stuff. Who has to call someone to make that? Okay. And that's quite the other side of responsibilities, yeah? You are not in charge of the data you create with your application. You have to call someone. And that's also a side of responsibilities, right? It would be nice if you could, yeah, be in charge of the backup. So that's microservices. And now let's have a look into how we actually do backups. So most of the time when I talk to people, they do backups like this. And this is really a simple example for just backing up a MySQL database and some user-generated image upload. So this is mostly the scenario we are talking about over this talk. Database, images, we upload it. So if you do a MySQL search, a Google search and do backup, and you want to do a MySQL backup and a file backup, you most likely end up with these 5-6 lines of bash. And yeah, I wouldn't recommend that, because the shell is no fun, at least for developers. And why is that? So, first, debugging is really hard on the shell. It's not object-oriented. It doesn't have exceptions, and we trained all developers to use object-oriented code and follow design principles. And yeah, it's not really available in Bash. And it's really hard to test. So there, unit tests. They are, sorry, but yeah, they're not that nice like a PHP unit or JUnit or whatever the default unit testing frameworks for programming languages are. And I think the worst thing is it encourages copy and paste programming, right? So I have this MySQL database, and I need a backup of it, and somebody calls me and says, yeah, you're doing a MySQL backup. How are you doing it? So yeah, I have this shell script, and I send it over to him, and then, oh yeah, thanks, and he fiddles around with it, so it works for him. And the next guy is asking him, and so this script's walking around and totally getting abortions of it everywhere, and it's not really nice. So yeah. Don't use the bash for backups. And if you don't believe me, Nikita Popov some days ago tweeted something like this. There are two things in computer science: Bash and convincing people Bash is terrible. So yeah. So if we don't want to use Bash, wouldn't it be nice if we have a standardized backup process for all our projects? And it also would be nice if we could configure our backups, so we don't have to worry about the technology we are backing up. And it would be really nice if the configuration could be part of our project. So just like a composer JSON or PHP unit XML, just put the backup configuration into your project and you're done. And yeah, there was no such thing around, so I created something called PHPBU. And what's PHPBU? PHPBU is a command line tool. It's a far file, just like a PHP unit or PHP-CS. You can configure your backups with it, and it's taking care of the whole process. So the complete process we were talking about: copying, checking, encrypting, moving to a secure location, cleaning up, and alerting somehow. So sounds quite nice. So how do you get it? Of course, you can install it via Composer, but I wouldn't recommend doing that. So the recommended ways to install PHPBU is the FAR file. You can download it manually from far.php bu.de. But I would suggest you use 5. Anybody of you know what 5 is? 5? So Arne Blankertz and is into these. It's basically Composer for far files. Yes. So if you need a library, you go up to GitHub, see, okay, it's installable via Composer. You go require Composer require the library I need, and it gets installed. And 5 is the same thing just for far files. So if you download the 5 far file, it's a far file as well, and from now on you only install your far files via 5. So 5 install PHP unit, and you get the PHP unit far file, and it's available, and you can have multiple versions installed and stuff like that. So it's really nice, a really nice tool. But the really important stuff, it's cryptographically secure. So it makes sure you really install the stuff the vendor is providing. So you really, it's handling the signature stuff. You can do, if you go to PHP unit, there's a whole documentation site about how do you verify that this PHP unit I downloaded really is the PHP unit. So you have to get Sebastian Bergmann's key and validate the key, and PHP 5 is taking care of all of that. So it's a really nice tool. So after we've installed it with one of the methods, let's have a look how we actually do our backup. So we start with the simple copying data stuff. And like I said, we have to configure PHPBU. And there are 2 ways. You can use an XML format or JSON. For the slides, I used the XML format because I think it's a little bit more readable. And yeah, so let's start. We have to define the PHPBU master tag, and then we have a list of backups, right? And the list of backups, obviously containing a backup. And every backup has a source and a target. And for the source, we can define the type. In this case, I'm using tar just to back up some user uploads. And we have to define where the user upload actually is located with the path. So the source is done. Let's have a look at the target. The target specifies where we want to store our backup. Yeah, right? So where we want to put it. In this case, we specify the directory, the file name, and the compression we want to use. Optional, but always nice to compress stuff. So in this case, we're using gzip. And that's all the configuration you need to handle the same backup the bash script previously was handling. So, okay, let's have a look at MySQL. Obviously, we have to create another backup with a source. And we put some options here for like username, password, databases we want to back up. And we're done. We configured our MySQL backup. So obviously, we need a target. Just the same as before, some directory name, file name. And in this case, we use the bzip2 compression, just to show that we have different type of compression. So now let's execute it. And we're going to the command line and typing phpbu. And it executes, doing some output, and shows us, okay, everything went okay. We did 2 backups. That's done. Nice. So what kind of sources do PHP support? It's MySQL, files, Redis, Postgres, MongoDB, Elasticsearch, ArangoDB, and yeah, you can extend it very easily for some crazy sources you want to back up. So it's yeah, a lot of stuff in there. Next step is the checking of your backup. So we go back to our configuration file, and add a check tag. And we just specify which tag test we want to execute and some restriction value. In this case, we'll check the minimal size of the backup, and it should be at least 100 megabytes. And if your backup is 89 megabytes, this will fail, and you will get notified. So currently, there are two checks, the min size and the comparison with the previous backup. So you can specify something like the size shouldn't differ more than 10% to the previous backup, stuff like that. But like I said, you can create your own checks as well. That's very easy. You'll see that later. Next up, encryption. So return to our configuration file, adding a crypt tag. In this case, we're using OpenSSL to encrypt our backup. And here we are setting a password and define the algorithm we want to use to encrypt it. And you're done. Your backup will be encrypted. For OpenSSL, there are a lot of options. You can use keys and config files, and the option list is like endless. It's all written down in documentation, but it's a little bit too much to show. This is really the simplest example. And there's an mcrypt encryption option as well, but I wouldn't recommend using it because it's totally out of date, and I shouldn't have implemented it in the first place. So don't use it. So after encryption, we're talking about moving it to a secure location. And in this case, we're calling this syncing. And for this example, we are using Dropbox. So if you want to sync something up to Dropbox via API, you need a token. You can generate this from the Dropbox front end. And then you have to specify a path where you want to store your backup on Dropbox. And that's nearly all you have to do to put your backups up to Dropbox. And these are the sync options we support. You can use Amazon Web Service S3, SFTP, AirSync, FTP, Dropbox, and SoftLayer. This is like the enterprise cloud from IBM, I think. Yes. Next is obviously the cleaning. So return to the configuration, add a cleanup tag. In this case, we want to limit the capacity our backups take up on our drive. And yeah, just say, okay, our backups should never exceed a size of 5 gigabytes. And if your backups take up more space than 5 gigabits, the oldest backups are deleted automatically. And you can use capacity. You can use outdated, something like delete every backup that is older than 2 weeks. And you can say, I only want to keep 20 backups. So if you reach 21, the oldest one will get deleted automatically. In the next version of PHPBU will be a cleanup strategy like, okay, keep 5 daily backups, 2 weekly, 1 monthly, and 1 yearly. So you can degrade the stuff over time. But that's not quite done yet. Will be in the next version of PHPBU. And the last stop we make is alerting. So alerting is done via logging. In this case, a mail logger. And if you use the simplest configuration, you just define the recipients you want to send the mail to. And then you should say if you want an email every time you create a backup, or if you only want to receive an email if something is failing. So if you have sent only on error true, you will only receive emails if something goes wrong. And so yeah, that's the complete tag. And your mails look something like this if everything went fine. And yeah, if something breaks, it changes to, I think, orange for warning and red for failing. And you get these nice little stats below, where you can see what happened there. So what have we accomplished right now? So we can configure our backups just like we wanted. We can store the configuration file in our project as phpbu.xml. We can copy the stuff, check it, encrypt it, move it, clean up, and we have some simple error reporting. That sounds quite nice, I would say. But wait a minute. So I have to configure the database credentials for my backup. And I have this already in my application, of course, or it's not really in my application, so it's in a configuration file my application reads, and so now I have it on 2 places. So that's not as nice as it can be. And as a Mac user, I'm stuck in adapter hell. So I thought, why not make adapters for PHPBU? And so the adapter concept is you can hook the PHP configuration into your existing project configuration. So if you have, if you're using .env, if you're using Laravel, I think is using .env, there's a .env adapter. And so you just list your adapters you want to use. In this case, we're using the .env adapter. And for the .env adapter, you only have to specify where the .env configuration file is located. Everybody knows .env? Yeah? Okay, fine. So now we hook into our .env file, and so we want to use some values from there. And this is done with a special syntax. You have to do adapter colon, my adapter colon, and then the name of the variable you want to use from your env file. So that's about it. And now you don't have to specify your database name or database password or something like this anywhere, so or on 2 places, so you can reference the one you already have. And there are 3 adapters available at the moment. The .env adapter, an environment adapter that uses the real environment variable, and an PHP array adapter. And so I think Zen framework is using a lot of array configuration, for example. So you can use these array configurations as well with the PHP array adapter. So you remember this guy? So now if we execute the whole configuration, we have 2 backups, and we can see that the MySQL backup and the file backup both went well. There were checks executed. 1 backup was synced to a secure location, and 2 cleanups were executed. So maybe the little fella looks more like this now. But backups are, yeah, I would say a little bit tricky sometimes. And if you configure something in XML and execute it, maybe you don't want to run this on production instantly. So maybe you want to do it like these guys and do a simulation up front. And so you can do this. This with PHPBU. You can add the option -- simulate. And what PHPBU does is it will simulate what it would do. So it will not execute anything, but it will output anything that it would have done if you wouldn't have provided the -- simulate option. So you can see here up front that it will show you exactly the commands it would have executed to back up the files and the database. So you can see the tar command, and you can see the syncing to Dropbox, and yeah, so you can verify that PHPBU really does the right thing in the background. And as you notice here, the token for the Dropbox API is reducted with stars. So this is a nice thing about PHPBU. It will never print your passwords or keys to a log file, the console, or wherever. So you won't see any of that. It will always get reducted. So yeah, if somebody who shouldn't have access to the database is scanning the log file, he won't get access to your passwords or keys or whatever. So this is a nice feature of PHPBU. So now we have this cool backup tool, but like I said, maybe you have this crazy technology over there, and that's not working with PHPBU. But like I said, it's very easy to extend it, and the way to extend it is by implementing a simple interface. So as you can see here, you can create your own sources, your own checks, scripts, syncs, cleanups, your own adapter, your own loggers, whatever. You only have to implement, most of the time, 2 interfaces, sometimes only 1. But the second one is always optional. So the first interface is for the real execution. So I really want to execute my backup. And the second interface is for the simulation. So it only is used on a simulation run. And you don't have to implement it. But if you don't implement it, PHPBU, if you run a simulation run, just does nothing. It says, OK, I simulate this execution, but I don't know what happens, because he doesn't implement the simulator interface. If that's fine for you, it's OK to only implement the execution interface. So let's do this with an example of a custom source. We have to extend the PHPBU app PHPBU source interface, the simulator interface we are ignoring for now. And so let's have a look at the source interface. The only thing you have to do is implement 2 methods. A setup method. The setup method is there to get the configuration options. So you have your class, your source class, and you want to pass in all that stuff that is configured in the XML file. So this is done via the setup method, and then you have to implement the actual backup method to really execute your backup. So quite simple on the first look. So let's create a my source, implementing source. We're implementing the methods, setup and backup. And so let's have a closer look at the setup method. We want to have some config value in our configuration and have it stored in our class or object. And then we use the setup method and read the configuration value from the XML stuff. And now we can store it in our instance. And then when we call backup, it's available. So the backup stuff is a little bit more complicated. You get these 2 arguments, like target and result. And the target is most of it is a representation of the target tag. Yeah, it has methods like get path name, get file name, so you know where to put your data. So just to get the right path from your configuration, you can use the target. And you can also ask the target, should I be compressed? And if so, get me the compressor I should use, and stuff like that. The result is something like it's like an event handler, and you can fire results like debug to it, and if anything bad happens, you should throw a PHPBU app exception. And what's really important for the backup method is you have to return a backup status. And the current version 4.x is PHP 5.4 minimum, 5 minimum. So we don't have the specified return types yet. So the next version will be PHP 7 only. And then we have the return types, and this will hopefully help a lot to create your own sources. But why is it so important to return the status? For example, the tar backup, so if you want to create a file backup, tar can handle compression with the same command. So it already can compress the backup. So and if you're using MySQL dump, it obviously have no options to compress the backup in one step. So we need a way to tell PHPBU if we already compressed the backup or if we didn't, and if it's a directory or if it's a file we stored. So it's very important to create this, to return this status. But that's about it. Yeah, and now we can so we have created our own backup source, and now we have to tell PHPBU that there's another source, and we're doing this with a bootstrap file. So in this bootstrap file, all we have to do is to tell PHPBU that there's a source and we want to use it in the configuration file. And this looks like this. Obviously, we have to make our source available, so require the source. And then we have to register the source to PHPBU. And we have to do this because we're using names in the PHPBU configuration, not full class names or namespaces. So we have to map the class we created to a name. And so we register our source, and we give it a name, my source, and we tell PHPBU where to find the implementation for that. And that's all you have to do. And the try-catch block is here because you can, if you want to, register sources that already exist. And normally this would throw an exception. So if you don't like my MySQL dump implementation, you can register your own. But the first note I would say, it's not a good idea. The MySQL dump implementation is already there. But you can add a force parameter, just as a fourth parameter you add true. And so I know, okay, you want to force the override and make sure you have your own MySQL dump implementation. So we included the plugin file to register the source. Now all we have to do is to configure it. So we use the my source. Then we add some configuration value we used, added some foo, and that's all we had to do to create our own backup. And if we execute PHPBU again, it would state, okay, now I created 3 backups, but as no checks or other stuff is configured, the other values aren't changing. So that's all you have to do to create your own backup source. And the other stuff is even more it's even simpler to create a cleanup or a check. The source is really the most complicated stuff. So benefits of this. So we have a unified backup process for all our projects. The cool thing is the developer is configuring the backup. So if a developer decides he creates a new folder where user can upload their stuff, he can edit the configuration for the backup at the same time and can make sure that the folder is backed up at the next time. So you don't have these situations where somebody created a new data source and in your application and something crashes and then, okay, where's the backup for that? Oh, I forgot to tell the ops guys that this new folder should have been backupped. So yeah, the developer is really in charge of the backup. And this is really nice because he feels responsible and he thinks about the stuff he creates. So he's not, from his mindset, he's not, oh, the ops guys are doing that and I don't care. So he really thinks about, okay, when I do this, I have to make sure I can recover if there's a crash with the backup that I configure. Right? So if anything, take away this, it's dangerous to go alone. So make backups, please make backups. And don't only make them, try to recover at least once a quarter, once a month. I would do it more often, but yeah, make sure the data is really valid and you can restore from them and do backup checks. And yeah, that's me. Yeah, you can find a lot of information on the PHPBU DE website. There's a nice documentation for PHPBU. You can follow me on Twitter. Check the stuff out on GitHub. And yeah, thank you.